Throughout the 80s and 90s, Shonen Jump would only get bigger and bigger. Popular manga would fill its pages year after year, but this golden era that it's found itself in can't last forever, and this year marks one of the last in Jump's so-called golden age. Big hits are still abound, as well as some smaller, lesser known manga though, so let's not waste any more time and dive straight into Shonen Jump in the year 1994. To kick off the year, let's start with JoJo and head back to Moria, where we start out with the arc Yukiko Yamagishi Dreams of Cinderella, really setting the trend for a group of fun JoJo arcs in 1994 that see Araki continuously think of bizarre scenarios to throw his cast into. The variety on display is great, with this first arc being romance focused, as we see Yukiko get a makeover from the stand Cinderella in order to help her win over Koichi. Any arc with Yukiko is pretty much guaranteed to be great because she's such a fun character, but I think this one adds a bunch of depth to her and Koichi, while also acting as a commentary on beauty. I ended up enjoying my reread of it way more than anticipated too. And to follow up, we get to see one of Part 4's biggest strengths in action as we go from this romance arc into tracking down Yoshikage Kira, featuring Koichi and Jotaro as they corner him after finding the origin of the button that fell off of his suit. Sheer heart attack is a real menace here, but the combination of Jotaro's endurance, Koichi upgrading to Echo Zack 3, and Josuke and Ieyasu coming in clutch let them corner Kira. However, Araki isn't content with this being the end, and we get the twist of Kira using Cinderella to change his appearance, further adding to the killer in plain sight narrative, and effectively this opens up a second half to the story. With the body change from Kira to Kosaku Kawajiri, a few new elements are explored or introduced. We now have this brewing B-plot where Kira has to blend in with his new family, which will be expanded on more in 1995 chapters, but this also lights a fire among the stand users of Morio to track him down, and we get some detective-style investigation as Josuke and Ko go and check out his home. I really like these chapters as we further explore who Kira is, as someone who doesn't want to stand out, always getting third place in competitions or appearing in the backgrounds of photos, but he is someone capable of a lot more. His desire to stay out of the limelight and his nail clipping collection add a lot to him as a character and his disturbed serial killer vibes. His father's ghost protecting him is also a neat development. I like that this arc veers into the idea of ghost photography, a fun occult concept, and it sets up a villain with an interesting motive in helping his son, while also allowing the story to keep generating new stand users. 3 of which we see in this year in various arcs. First off with the Rochambeau boy, say that 3 times fast, and in this arc we see Rohan punch and cheat against a child in Rock Paper Scissors who just really wants to play the game with him. Highway Star then involves Rohan again, that sees him and Josuke find a bizarre room in a service tunnel that when entered initiates a pursuing stand to chase you to suck out your nutrients. This leads to one of my favourite spreads Araki has ever done that depicts Josuke destroying and reassembling a motorcycle mid-jump in order to avoid hitting a baby. It's dynamic, expressive, and shows you just how meticulous Araki is in understanding everything he draws. Finally, we then have I Am an Alien, one of the best arcs in JoJo that's a sillier one amongst some of the serial killer huntings. Here, Mikitaka is introduced as a self-proclaimed alien who Josuke and Ieyasu find in a crop circle. It's up in the air whether he just has the stand of earth, wind and fire, or maybe he is actually an alien, an aspect I really like which only aids in how entertaining Mikitaka is. Josuke then scheming with him and turning him into a dice in order to cheat Rohan out of his money, only for Rohan's house to burn down, is also peak comedy too. Regardless of how the rest of the year goes, 1994 was a brilliant year for JoJo, featuring some fantastic art and a variety of arcs which built up characters, escalated the main mystery, and offered something for everyone. I look forward to covering the ending arcs of part 4 in the next video, so stay tuned for that, but for now let's cover some new manga that came out this year. Kuroyami wo Butobase, or Blow Away the Darkness, would last 13 chapters and 2 volumes by Hirofumi Miyazaki and Shinji Maizumi. The plot followed an 18-year-old called Hayato who gets framed for his own father's murder. Now on the run, he evades the police as well as the culprits in a deadly game of cat and mouse to prove his innocence and bring his father's killer to justice. From the synopsis alone, it sounds a little out of Jump's wheelhouse, but the year prior, The Fugitive would be released, likely inspiring this due to its popularity. Jump, as we'll come to discuss throughout this video, was also trying out a lot of new things this year as some of its older series winded down. That being said, Blow Away the Darkness didn't appeal enough to readers and was cancelled, although it seems due to its fast-paced thriller narrative, it works decently as a short story. This would also mark Shinji Imaizumi's last series in the magazine, with him working on a few smaller sports hits throughout the late 80s. Try as he might to adapt though, he would move on like many other artists. In a way, I think this manga is a great one to start the year with, as it's a distillation of what changes the magazine was going through. Older artists would either move on or attempt to create something new, which the magazine was heavily pushing for. Many of these series within 1994 would be aimed at a higher age group too, potentially because the readership had grown up with the magazine from children to adults. There is also a ton of police series that debuted in the year, so keep all of this in mind as we go through the manga that came out throughout 1994. Bomber Girl by Makoto Newano, another regular author at the time, would also return to try something new, though it would only last 11 chapters and 1 volume. Set in the year 20XX in the new millennium, we see a wildly different Japan full of diversity and crime where bounty hunters aim to clean up the streets and bring evildoers to justice. And one such bounty hunter is Roshamon Emi, a bombshell who prefers to blow people up and ask questions later. Bomber Girl is this super zany action comedy hybrid that fully capitalizes on its main character being shamelessly sexy and prone to violence, and I love it to bits. It's so unabashedly fun, Emi is extremely likable, and seeing her beat down bad guys with her tonfas, which switch between being explosives, knives, or submachine guns, is especially fun. She also interacts with everyone very well too, with her immediately establishing herself as the type of girl to extort those she saves, and won't hesitate to treat people beneath her like the dogs they are. This is helped by Makoto Newano's fun and expressive art style. Emi's proportions and facial expressions especially give off this mad scrimblow energy, like she's more of a creature than a person. Most chapters see her and her glorified sidekick Guy tackle various terrorists belonging to an organization called Megalith, but for the most part this just allows the characters to have fun fights against various kooky villains. Weirdly, Bomber Girl actually got a US release through Gutsoon Entertainment, with it being serialized in their Raijin Comics anthology. Something I haven't brought up in a while, but they also released some of Fist of the North Star, City Hunter, Slam Dunk, and other manga in English throughout the early 2000s. As to why Bomber Girl specifically was published in English, there is a small section in the English release that includes some comments by Newano himself, and it mentions him having a small cult following outside of Japan, which is really weird considering this is the only one of his works to get translated into English, aside from a few miscellaneous chapters of things here and there, but this was way after this version of Bomber Girl was published. So while there is a translation, it is old and discontinued. I managed to find the first 8 chapters online though, and they were a blast to read, but as for the last 3, perhaps I didn't look hard enough or they're stuck in its physical editions. Either way, I think this is one of my favourite cancelled manga from the period due to how over the top it is, and I recommend having a peek at it if you're able to find it. I'm also not the only one who likes it either, as Newano himself remarks that it's one of his favourite series, with it even getting 2 sequels in Bomber Girl Crush and Bomber Girl XXX. Then we get to our 3rd police series in a row with Midoriyama Police Gang by Shinobu Kaitani, lasting 20 chapters and 2 volumes. The series followed Kinosuke and Ginosuke, a pair of long-lost twins who got separated when Kinosuke tragically died in a river accident saving his brother, though he did not in fact die, and the two meet years later when Ginosuke is assigned to the Midoriyama police squad. Midoriyama being a part of Tokyo known for being rowdy, full of criminals and corrupt police, and in a messy turn of events, these two are reunited, with the police chief mistaking Kinosuke for his brother, who is actually a feared yakuza with a phoenix back tattoo named Grim Reaper Tatsu. From here on, the two swap places with a lot of jokes stemming from this premise, though it feels very well plotted out and has some pretty snappy dialogue. Couple this then with the setting and the two brothers getting involved in a love triangle with another policewoman, and it feels very unsuited for Jump, a sentiment I will wear out by the end of this video. Perhaps the author felt so too, as they would move on to seinen magazines, serializing some big names like Sommelier, One Out, and Liar Game after Midoriyama got cancelled. Jigoku Senshi Mao by Makoto Karabe would last 29 chapters in 2 volumes, being a gag manga despite the rather intimidating cover it has. It is this way for a reason though, as a portion of gags within the manga rely on the contrast between this super cute gag style and more serious demonic illustrations. The general premise is that the Demon King, Tanaka, is going to rule the world in 500 years, but before he does so he wants to first make the world a better place, so it's more fitting for his rule. Jigoku Senshi Mao then relies on evil characters doing kind or silly things to make you laugh. As well as this, there's the aforementioned jokes based around art contrast, as well as plenty of slapstick or potty humour. The artwork looks super cute too, and I love some of these gag designs Karabe has done. Tanaka especially is both cute and menacing depending on the type of gag he's involved in, and he has this jester-like design I especially love. There's a cuteness to some of the sidecast too, like with Beast, the bear-like mascot that fills the manga, and then there's this cool looking demon girl who shows up now and then I think. Another thing I like is the smatterings of random English, like kiss my ass, no sexy, or even shit, boldly being printed onto the cover. I really messed with this dumb type of humor, and I guess Japanese people not fully understanding the English language. It's a shame then, despite some level of popularity, it only lasted 29 chapters, and Makoto Karabe wouldn't really go on to do anything else as big, though they did serialize plenty of other gag one-shots throughout the 1990s in Jump. Following the success of Hana no Keiji years prior, Tetsuo Hara and Sho Aikawa would team up to create Kagemusha Tokugawa Ieyasu, another historical work lasting 51 chapters and 6 volumes total, being based off of novels by Keiichiro Ryu. This would be a historical drama set in the Keicho era, following Tokugawa Ieyasu and their shadow, a perfect doppelganger made to make assassination attempts more difficult. But when the real Tokugawa Ieyasu dies, in order to keep his dreams of a unified peaceful Japan alive, the doppelganger initiates a dangerous game of bluffs, taking on the role of their deceased master. Throughout the story, numerous famous historical people and events are brought up, like the Battle of Sekigahara, but it takes some liberties which allows it to be really enthralling with its mix of strategic battles and political intrigue. The art by Tetsuo Hara is of course excellent as always. Backgrounds are hyper-detailed, full of foliage, buildings, or armies. Characters are of course in his style, but the adherence to realism is very respectable, and he's capable of drawing some very evocative expressions, which leads into the writing and emotions this manga conveys. Like Fist of the North Star or Hana no Keiji, Hara is usually paired up with writers who not only can leverage him for great action scenes, but emotional, quieter ones too, which adds layers to the characters in these stories, like Kenshiro in Fist of the North Star or Jiro Saburo, our protagonist here. I really want to reiterate how much I love Hara's art, and particularly these emotional scenes. He is well praised, but often it's just for his action stuff and level of detail, but the feeling he expresses with some of his art is very palpable and is something worth going out of my way to acknowledge. Furthermore, because we follow a non-noble, non-samurai character who is thrust into this position of leadership, it gets to explore the time period in an interesting way, questioning the samurai lifestyle and its codes. For the longest time, I haven't really been interested in Japanese historical manga. I think it's often difficult to permeate, but the country's culture and history is so rich, and when a story like this comes around, it's a joy to learn through it. It's an extremely solid manga that juggles action, humor, and drama very well, and thankfully it's been fully translated if you'd like to read it, which I'd recommend you do. It is, however, only an adaptation of the first of 3 books, evident with the end of part 1 popping up in the final chapter, so the story isn't necessarily complete, but it does close out good enough. There was a spin-off named Sakon Sengoku Funroku, done a few years later but in Monthly Jump, that follows a character present in Kagemusha, though it takes on a more battle-focused approach and isn't a direct sequel as far as I'm aware. Ousama wa Roba, Hattari Teikoku no Gyakushuu, or The King is a Donkey, The Bluff Empire Strikes Back, would run for 129 chapters and 7 volumes by Kokichi Naniwa, and like the chapter to volume ratio and name suggest, it's a gag manga. Unlike a lot of others in Jump, it would initially begin as a set of one-page comics, having about 7 pages in each issue without a conjoining story or setup. Many of these were literally composed of 1 or 2 images, often relying on puns or bizarre imagery. It's pretty minimal looking, but there's a real beauty to how Naniwa draws characters. Some of his bigger spreads look gorgeous, like this one of this lady and this dragonfly. It's nothing super detailed, but the artwork is so expressive and appealing to me. Of course, it veers into silly territory a lot too and features many great expressions. Later on, little narratives would begin to form and jokes would take longer to set up, and with this came pages which were much denser with text. There was a real flexibility to it. Naniwa could pepper Jump with single-page jokes, throw in a short love story arc, or even have a segment where he brings up his own bizarre ideas that he thinks should exist. I think this is also another example of Jump targeting an older audience. I'm sure some jokes here would cater to children, but the art style coupled with how wordy or dry the humor can be makes me think it gripped older readers best. After many years and a few side adventures into some other sports, Yuichi Takahashi would return to Jump in 1994 with a full continuation of his legendary series, Captain Tsubasa, with Captain Tsubasa World Youth Saga, lasting for 164 chapters and 18 volumes, even getting the covers for issues 44, 45, and 46, which is 3 covers in a row later on within the year, showcasing its overwhelming popularity. This installment of Tsubasa would see the characters move on to the next stage, gearing up for the World Youth Tournament, with it initially focusing on Shingo Aoi's adventures in Italy before returning to Tsubasa. From there, Tsubasa with the All Japan Youth team plays through the AFC Youth qualification to secure their spot in the World Tournament, and in said tournament they would go on to play numerous heavy-hitting teams like Mexico, Italy, the Netherlands, and of course Brazil, where Tsubasa went to train after the manga's first installment. Overall, it's more Tsubasa. Yuichi Takahashi's art has improved, and the popularity of football at the time likely helped aid its rise as one of the most well-known sports manga to ever exist. I covered the original series all the way back in the 1981 video, and since then we've finally gotten an official English translation for Captain Tsubasa's original run in the Shonen Jump app, so now more than ever I think it's a good time to check it out if you haven't already. I also want to quickly thank the comments from that video, as many people declared their love for Tsubasa from all around the world, which I think is again one of the coolest things about the series, its global popularity and influence. Hopefully it gets a physical release and World Youth gets translated later down the line too. For now it's fully fan translated, and it seems the short-term serialization from the year prior featuring the Dutch team also has a translation too, which I did miss. So if you're a fan of Tsubasa or want to experience one of Jump's classic sports manga, now might be a good time to read it from the beginning. Also, if you would like to hear more about football manga in Jump, I'd also urge you to stick around, as Captain Tsubasa World Youth was only one of 2 new football manga to debut throughout this year. Next, we have the biggest hit of 1994 and a pretty important manga for Jump, Rurouni Kenshin, which would last 255 chapters and 28 volumes by Nobuhiro Watsuki. Kenshin would follow the titular character, a wandering swordsman who finds himself in the tumultuous early days of the Meiji era, one in which he helped to create through acts of bloody assassination as Hitokiri Batosai. Now renouncing his old ways, he wields a reverse-bladed sword and vows to never kill again, with the series going at great lengths to question his morality, the nature of justice, killing, and swordsmanship. This is all seeped in one of the most interesting periods of Japanese history too, a time of great change that I know little of, but the little I do know of, the Tokugawa shogunate, the Bakumatsu period, and the Meiji restoration, adds to this work immensely. But for those uninitiated, I think Kenshin does a great job at providing you with this compelling environment that is the setting of great change for the country of Japan. Initially, these ideas, historical concepts, and characters would be brought up in shorter arcs before the story would shift into larger arc structures, with the Kyoto arc featuring the infamous Shishio, and then the later Jinshu arc building on everything that came before to provide a satisfying climax. The manga often involves a lot of small comedic scenes or downtime between the characters, training, relaxing, or just interacting, but at its core it's full of battles, which I feel start off fairly grounded, but get more supernatural as pseudo-superpower abilities are used, which greatly increase the levels of spectacle in the manga. Characters also get more and more deformed as things go on, and lines between history and fantasy are blurred a lot more. Structurally, I think Kenshin acts as a big link between the battle shonen we know and love today and the ones that came before it from the earlier 90s and 80s. You can see the DNA in things like Dragon Ball, Dragon Quest Dai, and Yu Yu Hakusho, but Rurouni Kenshin for me is the first time the structure feels really modern, and as such I think it's held up really well in that regard. So it was solid, it had likable characters like Kenshin or villains in Shishio, and the setting was fairly attractive, especially with how it integrates real historical analogues to groups like the Shinsengumi. The artwork is also good, and it's rich in terms of themes and message to dive into. I bring all of this praise up because Kenshin was pivotal in holding Jump together through the incoming years. We'll dig into it a bit more as we go through them in future history videos, but we are at the tail end of Shonen Jump's golden age, and in a few years' time, many of Jump's biggest hits would end, causing a bit of a dark age for the magazine. Kenshin then would act as a primary big hit to Jump that it had in the interim between series like Dragon Ball, Slam Dunk, and Yu Yu Hakusho, and One Piece, Hunter x Hunter, and Naruto. As such, it's not just remembered fondly for being a good series, but also helping the magazine out in its time of need, and it would go on to inspire many future authors within Jump directly or indirectly. So its importance should not be understated. Kenshin has a ton of side media too, sequel manga, games, live action, and anime adaptations, with it being named Samurai X sometimes in the West, and usually I dig into these side ventures a bit more, but I'm going to just not this time as I want to address other aspects surrounding Kenshin instead. Going into making these videos, I knew eventually I'd have to touch on certain topics which may not be the nicest to discuss. The option to ignore them was also there, or to remove this section on Kenshin entirely due to the author Nobuhiro Watsuki and what they've done. This is where these videos as a historical retrospective and my personal experience and values clash, but hopefully I can make this discussion informative or interesting in some way. How then do I discuss a work created by someone who has done something repulsive? How do I separate the art from the artist? I'm sure for some that's easy and you can do it without batting an eye. Maybe you don't care, or you just pirate Watsuki's work, and more power to you if you do. But as someone who is an artist and who loves artists, loves art, and likes to know who and why people makes the manga I love, it's something I don't quite have the luxury of doing. It's something intimate and special for me because I know how much heart and soul go into the art people make. In this case, that's been tough to comprehend. Often I have to distance myself from that philosophy, or I just read with a bad taste in my mouth. But I didn't want to talk about Kenshin in a compromised manner. It is a good manga and was very impactful. This is undisputed and very important. But it's also my prerogative to inform people that maybe don't directly buy these volumes of Kenshin or any other manga he's had a part in creating, as in 2017, Nobuhiro Watsuki was found guilty of possessing over 100 DVDs of adult videos containing children. And what's more maddening about this, and the real reason why this is as relevant to Shonen Jump as it is because of how light a sentencing he got and the outcry of support he received from his place of work and his fellow mangaka. The fact that he's still making manga to this day, including Rurouni Kenshin, and frequently you hear public support from some of the biggest creators in the field, is especially disappointing. I'm sure it's a mix of all sorts of factors as to why, personal, cultural, corporate reasons, but his defense is all disgusting, and sadly it leaves a huge blemish on one of Shonen Jump's biggest hits. I want to note that this is the only time I'll mention this in any large capacity, and for future series by Watsuki, it'll be a quicker mention. I've also purposely not made a Kenshin thumbnail and don't intend to put any series made by this creator or similar creators in the limelight, though they will get full entries like every other manga I cover. I also want to mention that if you like Kenshin as a manga, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and there's absolutely no judgment coming from me whatsoever. With that out of the way, let's move on. Manyuuki Babato Oware na Geboku-tachi would see Mangataro return to Jump after his disturbing but fairly famous Jump gag manga Chinyuki, and similarly it would be a comedy manga focusing on Mangataro's unique grotesque art style. It would last 21 chapters in 2 volumes and would follow Nyan Nyan, the disciple of Man, who gets into all sorts of trouble, which often involves her getting cartoonishly beaten up or covered in some sort of gross substance. You might also notice that her design is actually really cute compared to how Mangataro usually draws things, and it's this contrast between super cute and horrifying kill it now that I adore a ton. Seeing Nyan Nyan come up against these grotesque pastiches of Journey to the West is a lot of fun, and I think her inclusion makes the more violent and dirty gags more digestible. The way she trips and falls, accidentally killing yokai, is always funny to me, and how she's treated by Man, her demonic mentor, also never fails to get a laugh out of me. I much prefer this to Chinyuki. A lot of jokes hit very hard, either due to the art contrast or because they're silly, like this horse being surprised in chapter 1 that Nyan Nyan can speak the horse language. It just mixes fourth wall breaking and absurdism in a very fun way. There's also a lot of parody involved, like a chapter focusing on Santa Claus, or on Dragon Ball with King Bokuri being a character later on, an obvious copy of Demon King Piccolo. 1 volume out of the 2 has been translated into English, so you can check it out if you'd like, and I'd recommend it if you want to see one of Jump's weirdest gag manga, as well as an artist with an unforgettable way of drawing things. Sadly, this would mark the end of Mangataro's reign of terror on the magazine. His works both didn't last that long, but he definitely made an impact with his bizarre stories. Fukashigidou Kitan, or Mysterious Hall, lasts 10 chapters in 1 volume by Koichi Endo, known for his prior gag manga Miracle Tonchinkan in Jump. This would take a similar structure to the then serializing horror series Outer Zone. Both were episodic manga, but in this case, a person in each chapter who had lost all hope would find themselves in this mysterious hall. There they can purchase a range of mystical items that would always come in handy. Unlike Outer Zone, it was a lot tamer, focusing on telling humanistic stories which were heartfelt, with whatever item the people visiting the hall received helping them restore their hope. The artwork looks pretty nice, and like many series releasing from this year, it had an air of maturity to it. Sadly, it didn't pique the interest of readers and was quickly cancelled. Ultra 11 by Tatsuya Watanabe and Tenya Yabano would last 10 chapters in 1 volume, though it's important to note that this was not a cancelled manga but a shorter work. Japan at the time was football crazy thanks to the establishment of the J-League in 1992, with its first season premiering the year after in 1993. The first 3 years were highly popular and successful, and this manga falls in between this period. This also likely explains a potential push for Yoichi Takahashi to do more Captain Tsubasa. What Ultra 11 is then is an instructional or educational manga on how to play football. It starts off with Johto FC, a youth football club who has good members, but they lack the cohesion to work as a team, leading them to lose every single one of their matches. The manga builds up to a rematch between them and their rival team of Nanban FC, who are much better than them, and their coach, thinking they stand no chances, brings in a football instructor to help them called Fudou. From my understanding, Fudou then teaches each character specific lessons, with the manga going in depth on the game's rules and strategies in an attempt to teach the readers how the game works and how to play, while also offering a light narrative. With all the players having learned new skills and how to work together, they go for their rematch and beat their rivals, tying everything up in 10 neat chapters. I always find works like this in Jump really interesting, as they divorce themselves from the usual cancellation discourse and are what they are. In this case, it also provides insight into what was popular at the time in Japan. I also really love the designs here. The style is a lot more reminiscent of children's manga. A few places point out that this wouldn't be amiss in CoroCoro Comic, a magazine like Jump aimed at a younger audience. And since we've been mentioning audiences' age a lot in this video, it's cool to see that Jump weren't completely snubbing their younger readership, as this was most definitely aimed at them. A fun fact as well is that the artist Tenya Yabano would go on to do the manga for Inazuma 11, a very popular football mixed media franchise. I think it's really neat then that this is effectively a bit of a precursor to that. Yatsu no Nawa Maria, or Her Name is Maria, would last 9 chapters in one volume by Munenori Michimoto. This would follow Maria, a violent woman who accidentally gets marked as a super teacher and goes on to showcase her unique teaching methods, which usually involve beating up delinquents or being a lot more forceful than most. I've heard it described as Jump's attempt to do a great teacher Onizuka-like manga, and while the female teacher lead is a refreshing idea, sadly it didn't seem to approach its humanistic elements well and was quickly cancelled. And at 9 chapters, it's one of the quickest cancellations in Shonen Jump history. Following a similar quick fate, Tokyo Hanzai Monogatari Bosatsu to Fudou would last 9 chapters in one volume by Ryuji Sugihara and Makoto Iwasaki. This would be yet another police-oriented work that would see the rookie detective, Saint Date, struggle with the demands of his job as he believes too much in the criminals he's supposed to apprehend. It seemed to tackle themes of justice and innocence as they contrast Date with a much older and rigid partner in Kenzo Hirai. It's a work that exhibits many traits from a lot of manga this year in a police focus, it being a humanistic story, and it likely appealing to an older demographic, with it also being very by the books and a little outdated in terms of storytelling. It's no wonder then that it wouldn't last very long. Bakudan would last 17 chapters in 2 volumes by Akira Miyashita, which would be his final work within Jump, having been active since the 70s, and that same retro charm and art style is still present in this work, with it perhaps being my favourite I've read from him. It follows Baku Ryosuke, or Bakudan, a delinquent who vows to become the top yakuza in all of Japan, having never lost a fight even once. Like most of Miyashita's other works, there's a focus on manliness, and while a lot of his works present this in an almost comedic over-the-top way, I feel like Bakudan is a bit more grounded. It's still over the top and silly, of course. Bakudan does shit like punch through the special juvie stone walls to save his fellow inmates from a fire, he trains by punching live hornets, or even lifts a car with 2 people still inside. But I think there's a bit more restraint in this story compared to his prior forays into Jump. A big reason why is that alongside Bakudan being a Yakuza story, it also interweaves a boxing plot, as both the 7th Don of the Aranka unit Akamatsu Umesawa of the Yakuza and Ken Tamaki, a retired heavyweight champion, both seek Bakudan to follow their paths as they see great potential in him. There's an initial exploration of what great strength should be used for, and it ends up being a great setup for Bakudan to enter the world of boxing. Sadly, that methodical story-building approach and it taking over a volume to establish that it is a boxing manga likely was a factor in it getting cancelled in such a short time. It's a bit of a shame to see a veteran like this leave Jump, but I do think they had their heyday and times just change. This is also a manga you can read in full and has been translated, and is pretty fun as long as you can stomach some of the slurs and colourful language used in its translation. And another final series for a Golden Age veteran, Tsukasa Hojo's Rash would last just 17 chapters and 2 volumes. It would see Yuki Asaka return to her hometown to take over her grandmother's duties as the local penitentiary's doctor. As with most of Tsukasa Hojo's manga, there's a good balance of bombastic action, plenty of drama, and a ton of sex appeal. In this case, Yuki is a character who can't help but flaunt herself and has the gumption to fight back if things get violent, which is important, as Rash is honestly more of a police manga than a doctor one, with her often getting involved with various criminal cases that get out of hand. This manga flip-flops between so many elements, and the prison setting as well as most doctor elements are forgone to focus on crime drama aspects like in many of Hojo's prior series. Supposedly, this is due to Hojo accepting more editorial intervention after his last series, Under the Dappled Shade, was cancelled, where he focused on creating a story he wanted to make. As a work inside of Jump, like many from this year, it feels very unsuited. There's a lot of murder, serious talks on justice, and a big focus on cops doing drug busts. From what I've read of Hojo's series, this is the most strained. There's fun ideas and characters here, but it lacks cohesion, leading to a story that even Hojo's great artwork can't save. You can also read this one in full, as it has a full fan translation too. Midori no Makibao would be another big hit of the year, though one seldom mentioned with some of Jump's other big manga. It would last 150 chapters and 16 volumes by Tsunemaro, who was fresh off of completing his last animal comedy related hit, Mon Mon Mon. Midori would follow the titular little racehorse from birth, seeing him grow up and face various hardships due to his appearance, small stature, and the loss of his mother at the beginning of the series. But he would prove everyone wrong with his tenacity and skill at racing, which he gets better and better at as the series progresses, with him making new friends and rivals alike. While Midori does have an overall progressing narrative, it would be filled with gags, a lot of situational ones, or some which are just very vulgar. Expect plenty of poop and pee here, which would be a hit with younger children, and I assume the horse racing elements, which many people liked, pulled in a lot of older readers too. Even looking at the later races compared to the first few chapters, a lot of care and detail has been crammed into the art, and I'm sure the contrast between the gags and the more dramatic elements heightened them even further. Midori is an underdog story, and I think it successfully grasped the fundamentals of what makes a lot of Jump manga special. Its friendship, effort, and victory slogan. It's all here and well executed. What I understand though, the ending is sometimes criticized or called out as if it were cancelled. I'm not entirely sure of this, but the series did do well, even spawning a 61 episode anime in 1996 that was catered to a more family friendly audience. It would also receive a few games, notably one on the Game Boy and one for the PlayStation. As well as this, it had a short 25th anniversary short in 2022, and as recently as 2024 it had a short net animation that ran for 25 episodes called Dokodemo Makibao, showing that it's still fondly remembered even to this day. Like Rurouni Kenshin, it's a pretty important work for Jump that helped keep the magazine afloat through its more tumultuous years, and recently it started to get a fan translation so you can read the first few chapters for yourself. And our last manga of the year would be Mind Assassin, lasting 28 chapters and 5 volumes by Hajime Kazu. Mind Assassin is a very odd work for Jump, following the descendant of a psychic Nazi assassin named Kazui who lives in present-day Japan with the ability to destroy and alter the minds of others. From the first chapter's title alone, you can kind of tell that this is going to be something different. The One Who Carries on Sadness isn't a typical chapter title you'd expect from Jump, and its contents prove that, as it goes on to establish Kazui as a doctor who uses his powers to erase the bad memories of others. In this way, Mind Assassin is another humanistic drama, but from the 2 chapters that are available to read in English, it has a very somber vibe as it tackles themes related to memory and how it can come to hurt or hinder us. That alone is a pretty mature topic, but couple that with Kazui dealing with a murder in chapter 1 with threats of rape being thrown around, child abuse in chapter 2 and him assassinating bad guys by destroying their minds, and him adopting an 18-year-old boy whose past was so harrowing he'd almost completely removed every single memory from him, and all of this adds up to something pretty melancholy. The art helps a lot with this too, as it's quite simple or perhaps even clinical. There's a lack of filled-in blacks and a focus on dialogue and expressions, which gives it a very unique feel. It fits well as it's contemplative and unnerving. While it didn't last very long in Jump, it did manage to get some extra chapters in Jump's monthly seasonal magazines, and got a novel version lasting 3 volumes and 3 whole drama CDs too, with many people remembering it fondly due to how different it was. And now that we've run through all the new manga that came out in 1994, let's reflect on the beginning and ending of the year to see how things changed and what state Jump was in. Starting off, we have the big guns in Dragon Ball, Slam Dunk, Yu Yu Hakusho, and following them plenty of classics like Roku Tanashi Blues, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Ninku, Hallelujah 2 Boy, Healthy Janube, and Dragon Quest Dai. For comedy manga, we have Kochikame, Jungle King Tachan, Lucky Man, and Bon Bon Zaka. We also have Pennant Race for the mandatory baseball representation, and then Outer Zone for spooky back of the magazine horror. Then we have a few cancelled or shorter manga in DNA Squared, Dreadnought Warrior Justice, Neural Network Melinda Fight, and Under the Dappled Shade. A pretty excellent roundup of series overall. 1994 would then act as a bit of a shake-up for Jump, with DNA Squared, Under the Dappled Shade, Dreadnought Warrior Justice, and Neural Network Melinda Fight swiftly ending. Ninku, after being absent for most of the year, would reboot into Ninku's second stage. Pennant Race would end as would Outer Zone. Most notably though, due to the strain of long-term serialization, Yu Yu Hakusho would also come to a close this year. Thankfully, Jump had many strong series ongoing still, but plenty of them were heading towards their conclusion. Usually I would have a segment on Dragon Ball in these videos, but it was one of the series heading for its conclusion, so I think we'll have a nice big send-off segment in the next video instead. Captain Tsubasa returning would alleviate the loss of Pennant Race and fit right at home in the mag due to the popularity of football at the time. And of course, Rurouni Kenshin would be a pivotal manga that would bridge the gap between the Golden Age ending and some of the bigger hits of the late 90s beginning. Midori Makibao would be Jump's next big long-running comedy cross-sports manga for the foreseeable few years, as well as Ousama wa Roba sticking to the back of the magazine and offering different types of jokes. We then have Kagemusha Tokugawa Ieyasu as a historical work that would last a full year, as well as the new Mind Assassin, an odd work for the magazine that blended action and humanistic elements, lasting for about half a year. Then finally we have Rash and Bakudan, two works by veteran authors which would both not last very long. All in all, it's a pretty solid roundup of series, and while the loss of Yu Yu Hakusho is a big one, I think the new series do a good job of filling in, and there's a good amount of variety too, due to how much Jump was experimenting at the time. I think it's also important to note once again the push for mature series within the year. I think it's pretty undeniable, and the tone of the series feels different from this year to me. However, the series that did succeed from this year were Tsubasa, Midori, and Rurouni Kenshin, which feel a lot more appropriate to younger audiences, so I'm curious to see how the magazine develops in the coming years, especially as the next few are sometimes labeled as Shonen Jump's Dark Age. Perhaps it was the push to try all sorts of new things that ultimately hurt them, as in the future some of the biggest hits of the magazine would be tried and true battle shonen, but we have a few years until Jump gets to that point again. And if you'd like to see me cover those future years of Shonen Jump, its Dark Age, and when we eventually reach the shining light of One Piece, then please stick around, like the video, comment, and subscribe for more. Alongside these history videos, I make a bunch of others on Shonen Jump manga, notably cancelled titles like in my X-Files series, where I approach works in a bit more depth than I do here. Alongside this, I also love to talk about manga generally, and would love to cover more magazines at some point too. And if you really like what I make, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I'm not sure I'd still be trucking away as hard as I do without the support I've received, so I'm very grateful. If you do join, you'll get access to some exclusive behind the scenes videos, like some recent first impressions for the new Jump series Otter of the Flame, as well as access to some exclusive polls to decide some future videos, and at the $3 tier you'll get a unique little doodle drawn by me to represent you in the video credits, like these wonderful people. Thank you, Kinocha, Jade, Kazuku Garu, Soraquil Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Chris P. Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Yozakura Psycho, Wurzel, Violent, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, Vino Burrito, Caffeine Dad, Cryonaut, Crash, 41IZ, Hong, Jamie Reynolds, Manu, Poke Emblem, James Miller, Jopa Monkey, Just a Virus, Star Sphinx, PK Broly, Fenrir Black, Elijah, Neo Humanoid, and also Hilltop, Vaka Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, John Sanford, Color, Jaime, Strawberry Prosione, Vaz, Palette, Ruiner, Juice, and TG Talks Manga at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.